My name is Audrey, 33 years old, and at my grandfather's will reading, his lawyer handed me a $499 million check. My father snatched it from the mahogany table, lit a match, and burned it right in front of me while my mother and sister laughed. I did not fight back. I just smiled and took a slow sip of my black coffee. They had no idea what he had actually just set on fire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The air in Lawyer Donovan's Chicago office smelled of expensive leather and impending disaster. We were all gathered around a massive oak conference table for the final reading of Grandpa Theodore's will. My father Richard, the CEO of a major logistics empire, sat at the head of the table. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, fully expecting to inherit the entirety of Grandpa's hidden real estate fortune. Patricia, my mother, sat rigidly beside him, adjusting her heavy diamond necklace and whispering excitedly to my younger sister Savannah about the country club renovations they could finally fund with the windfall. Savannah's husband Jamal, an incredibly talented African-American orthopedic surgeon, sat quietly near the back of the room, looking visibly uncomfortable with the sheer unfiltered greed radiating from his wife's family. Lawyer Donovan cleared his throat deliberately, adjusting his reading glasses as he opened a thick manila folder. He did not hand a stack of legal documents to the man who assumed he was the rightful heir. Instead, Donovan pulled a single crisp piece of paper from his briefcase and slid it directly across the polished wood table to me. It was a formal cashier's check made out to Audrey for exactly $499 million. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening, and heavy. Richard's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. The vein in his thick neck throbbed violently against his tailored silk collar. He slammed his fist down onto the table with such force that the crystal water pitchers rattled and sloshed over the sides. In one swift, aggressive motion, he lunged forward, snatching the check out of my hands before I could register the numbers printed on the front. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a silver lighter. "You are not getting a single dime of this family's legacy," Richard growled, his voice shaking with absolute rage. He flicked the lighter. The bright orange flame caught the edge of the thick paper instantly. He held it up, letting the fire rapidly consume the zeros, the signature, and my name, holding it until the heat nearly scorched his fingers before dropping the remains into a glass ashtray in the center of the table. I sat perfectly still in my chair. I crossed my legs, picked up my porcelain cup, and took a deliberate, quiet sip of my black coffee. Patricia leaned aggressively across the table, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "Why are you just staring like that? Your father did the right thing. You do not deserve a single penny of this money. You ran away when you were 18 years old because we asked you to do one simple, selfless thing for your sister. Savannah needed a down payment for her lavish starter home, and you selfishly refused to hand over your college fund to help her. You chose a stupid computer degree over your own flesh and blood. You lost your place in this family the day you walked out that door." Savannah smirked, adjusting the strap of her designer handbag as she looked down her nose at me. "You always were a selfish brat, Audrey. Did you really think Grandpa was going to reward you for abandoning us?" I looked at them. Richard heaved with anger. Patricia nodded vigorously at her twisted version of history. Savannah soaked up the unearned validation she had fed on her entire life. They saw my silence as total defeat. They assumed because I was not screaming or crying or begging for the ashes of that check they had somehow won the war. They thought I was still that powerless, frightened 18-year-old girl they had thrown out into the winter rain simply because I refused to sacrifice my future and my education to fund Savannah's luxury lifestyle. They had no idea that the quiet woman across from them had spent 15 years building Sentinel cybersecurity into a dominant force, securing federal defense contracts and handling the digital infrastructure of companies like Richards. I placed my coffee cup down on the saucer. It made a soft, calm clinking sound that echoed in the room. Lawyer Donovan had not moved a muscle to stop Richard's outburst. He had simply sat back in his plush leather chair watching the paper burn until there was nothing left in the ashtray but gray soot and smoke. He reached over to his tablet, which had been propped up facing my father, and calmly tapped the screen to stop the video recording. He folded his hands neatly on the table and looked directly into my father's eyes. "Thank you for that clear demonstration," Richard Donovan said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "That check you just aggressively destroyed was merely ceremonial. A prop, if you will. The actual $499 million was wired directly into Audrey's private encrypted accounts 24 hours ago." Richard froze instantly, the triumphant sneer melting completely off his face. Patricia stopped adjusting her jewelry, her hand hovering in the air. Savannah's smug smile vanished. The brutal reality of their situation finally crashed down upon all of them. Donovan leaned forward, his gaze hardening into something sharp and lethal. "However, by intentionally and maliciously burning this physical representation of the trust document on camera, you just triggered your father's poison pill clause." The silence in the room shattered the moment lawyer Donovan finished his sentence. My father vaulted out of his chair with such explosive force that the heavy mahogany legs scraped violently against the polished floorboards, letting out a sharp shriek. He slammed both of his large hands onto the table, his face turning a terrifying shade of purple. He completely ignored the smoldering ashes of the fake check sitting between us, his chest heaving as he processed the magnitude of the trap he had just walked into. "You are lying!" Richard roared, his voice echoing off the thick glass walls of the conference room. "You set this up. This entire charade is a setup. I will sue you, Donovan. I will sue this entire law firm into the ground. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 2 decades until you are disbarred and living on the street. You cannot legally give her that money. She manipulated a sick old man. She committed elder abuse." Lawyer Donovan did not even flinch. He casually adjusted his tailored suit jacket, his expression maintaining the icy professional detachment of a man who had anticipated this exact tantrum. "Theodore was of sound mind, Richard. 3 separate independent psychiatrists evaluated your father the week before he finalized this specific addendum to his will. Furthermore, the poison pill clause was his express request. He explicitly stated that if you attempted to physically destroy the trust certificate out of spite, it would immediately trigger a cascade of severe legal and financial consequences. You just willingly handed me the match." Patricia grabbed Richard's arm, her heavy diamond bracelets clanking loudly as she tried to pull him back from the edge of the table. "Richard, do not let them bait you. We will get our own lawyers. We will freeze her accounts today before she can hide a single penny." She turned her venomous glare toward me, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in raw hatred. "You little sociopath. You planned this. You stayed away for 15 years just waiting for him to get weak so you could swoop in and steal what rightfully belongs to us." Right on cue, Savannah began to cry. It was not a genuine display of grief, but the practiced high-pitched wail she had perfected since childhood whenever she was caught in a lie or needed to divert attention. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she leaned into her husband. She manipulated him. Savannah sobbed, peeking through her fingers to ensure everyone was watching her dramatic performance. Grandpa was so confused at the end. Audrey must have visited him secretly and poisoned his mind against us. She has always been jealous of me. She has always wanted to destroy my life because I have everything she never could get. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the arms of my chair. I watched her performance unfold exactly as Grandpa Theodore and I had predicted it would years ago. Jamal had remained entirely silent in the corner of the room until now. He stepped forward, his tall, athletic frame casting a long shadow over his wife. As a brilliant orthopedic surgeon, Jamal was a man trained to rely strictly on facts, empirical evidence, and clear diagnostics. The hysterical theatrics of his in-laws clearly unsettled him, but it was Savannah's specific choice of words that made him frown deeply. He looked from Savannah to me, then back to his wife, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Wait a minute," Jamal said, his deep, resonant voice cutting sharply through the chaotic shouting of my parents. "Savannah, what are you talking about? You told me Audrey was the one who manipulated the family and stole your college money." Savannah froze instantly, her fake sobbing halting mid-breath. She looked up at Jamal, her eyes darting nervously toward Richard and Patricia as a flash of genuine panic crossed her features. Jamal, do not do this right now. My grandfather just died. I am grieving. Please be supportive. Jamal did not back down. He crossed his arms, his surgical precision applying directly to the conversation. No, you specifically told me that when you were 18, Audrey drained your shared college savings account and ran away in the middle of the night. You told me she left you with absolutely nothing and that Richard had to take out a second mortgage just to pay for your education. You said that was the reason she was dead to this family. The air in the room grew incredibly dense, thick with the sudden threat of exposure. Patricia quickly stepped in, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet and patronizing tone. Jamal, sweetheart, this is private family business. Savannah is highly emotional today. You do not understand the complex history here. We protected you from the ugly details because we wanted to welcome you into our elite world without burdening you with her toxic past. Jamal looked at my mother with absolute disbelief, rejecting her thinly veiled attempt to put him in his place. I am asking a simple, straightforward question about a very specific theft. Savannah told me Audrey stole her money. Audrey, did you steal her money? I finally moved. I uncrossed my legs, reached down into my sleek leather briefcase, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a certified bank record from 15 years ago, complete with official signature verifications and time-stamped withdrawal receipts. I did not say a single word in my own defense. I simply slid the heavy document across the long table. It glided over the polished wood and came to a stop directly in front of Jamal. Savannah shrieked and lunged for it. "Do not look at that!" she yelled, her manicured fingers clawing desperately at the paper. "It is a fake. She is a hacker. She fakes digital records for a living. You cannot trust anything she gives you." Jamal easily sidestepped her frantic grabbing and picked up the document, holding it out of her reach. He scanned the printed lines, his eyes tracking the highlighted transactions with clinical speed. I watched his expression shift rapidly from confusion to realization, and finally to a profound, sickening horror. The document clearly showed the joint college fund established by Grandpa Theodore. It showed a massive withdrawal of $80,000. But the signature on the withdrawal slip did not belong to me. "This is your signature, Savannah Jamal," said his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet whisper. "You withdrew the money, and this transfer receipt shows it went directly into the escrow account for the starter house you bought the year before we met." Savannah's face drained of all color, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. She looked frantically at Richard, silently begging him to fix the situation, but Richard was too busy glaring at Lawyer Donovan to care about Savannah's collapsing marriage. Patricia tried to speak, but Jamal held up a firm hand, silencing her instantly. "You lied to me for our entire relationship," Jamal said, staring at Savannah as if he was looking at a complete stranger. "You let me believe your sister was a thief. You let me sit at family dinners and listen to your parents endlessly bash her, knowing the whole time that you were the one who took the money." Backed into a corner with her absolute perfect victim narrative completely destroyed, Savannah did what she always did when she was caught. She went on the vicious offensive. Her face twisted into an ugly, entitled sneer. She squared her shoulders and practically spat her words at her husband. "So what if I took it?" Savannah screamed, her voice echoing violently off the glass walls. "I had every right to take that money. What was she going to do with it? She was just going to waste it on a useless tech degree anyway. She was a nobody. I was the one who needed a luxury house to maintain our social standing. I forged her stupid signature because she was too selfish to just hand it over when Dad told her to. I deserve that money." Jamal stared at his wife, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman who had just proudly confessed to a felony and to destroying her sister's life purely out of greed and vanity. The heavy silence that followed her horrific confession hung in the air, signaling the end of everything they had built. 2 hours later, the tension transferred to my father's estate. The post-funeral reception was in full swing. Caterers wove through the crowd of business magnates carrying trays of champagne. On the surface, it looked like a respectful gathering, but the cracks in my family's perfect facade were aggressively widening. Richard stood near the fireplace, smiling tightly at investors, while his eyes darted frantically around the room, hunting for me. Savannah cowered in a corner, completely avoiding Jamal. Jamal stood alone near the patio doors, his posture rigid, his gaze locked onto his wife with terrifying clarity. The revelation of the stolen money had fundamentally broken his perception of her. I wanted no part of this ridiculous performance. I set my glass of water on a passing tray and made my way toward the heavy oak front door, intending to leave them all to their implosion. Before I could reach the exit, a thick hand clamped down brutally hard on my upper arm. I was violently yanked backward and shoved into the narrow, dimly lit hallway leading to my father's private study. Richard stood blocking my path. His public smile was completely gone, replaced by a mask of desperate, cornered fury. His breathing was heavy, smelling of scotch. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a folded legal document, shoving it aggressively against my chest. "You are going to sign this right now," Richard demanded, his voice a harsh, grating whisper intended to stay hidden from his wealthy guests. "It is a legal waiver drafted by my attorneys. It completely nullifies the poison pill clause. It states that you willingly surrender the money back into the primary family trust." I let the paper fall from my chest. It fluttered to the Persian rug between our feet. I slowly looked back up into my father's bloodshot eyes. "I am not signing anything," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You burned the check, Dad. You triggered the clause. You let your ego and absolute hatred for me override your common sense. You did this to yourself." Richard stepped closer. "I am not playing games with you, Audrey. Do you have any idea the financial leverage I am balancing? Do you know what happens to my logistics company? If that money does not hit my accounts by Monday morning, I will be ruined. My empire will collapse. Pick up that pen and sign away that money, or I swear you will regret the day you were born." Before I could respond, the sharp clicking of heels echoed down the hallway. Patricia stormed toward us, her face flushed with anger, holding a glass of white wine so tightly her knuckles were white. "What is taking so long?" Patricia snapped, glaring at me. "Just sign the damn paper, Audrey. Have you not caused this family enough embarrassment for one day? First you humiliate your father in front of that lawyer, and then try to destroy your sister's marriage with fabricated bank documents." "They are not fabricated, Mom," I replied coldly. "Savannah literally just confessed to forging my signature and stealing my college fund to buy a house. She admitted it in front of a room full of people." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please. Savannah was just flustered. She was covering for you. We all know you squandered that money and tried to blame her. You owe your father this money to make up for all the pain you have caused us since you selfishly abandoned this family. We raised you. We fed you. You owe us everything." I stared at my mother, marveling at the sheer depth of her delusion. She was willing to completely rewrite reality just to protect her precious golden child and her husband's bank accounts. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped out of the shadows of the adjoining library. Jamal walked into the narrow hallway, his expression darker and colder than I had ever seen it. He had heard every single word of my parents' deranged demands. "Jamal, thank goodness," Patricia said, her tone shifting back to her sickly sweet, patronizing voice. "Please talk some sense into your crazy sister-in-law. She is having one of her psychotic episodes again. You need to control her before she causes any more damage to our family." Jamal did not look at me. He kept his dark, piercing eyes locked entirely on Patricia. He stepped squarely between me and Richard, placing his broad shoulders like a physical barrier protecting me from my father's intimidation. Patricia rolled her eyes, sighing. "Honestly, Jamal, I do not know why you are acting difficult today. You should be thanking us. We let you marry into this family. We gave you access to an elite world you never would have seen otherwise. You should be grateful we elevated you instead of causing problems alongside her." The hallway plunged into an absolute dead silence. Patricia had finally said the quiet part out loud. The deeply offensive and classist condescension she had masked with fake smiles for years was suddenly laid bare for everyone to see. She viewed Jamal not as an accomplished surgeon, but as a charity case they had tolerated for Savannah's amusement. Jamal did not raise his voice. He did not yell or lose his temper. His absolute surgical calm made his response infinitely more devastating. He looked at Patricia with a disgust so profound it made her physically shrink back. "I am a board-certified orthopedic surgeon," Patricia Jamal said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "I make 3 times what your husband does in a bad year. You did not elevate me. You dragged me down into your miserable, fraudulent swamp." He turned his head slightly, calling out to the end of the hallway, where Savannah had just nervously appeared clutching the wall. And Savannah Jamal commanded, his voice echoing like a judge handing down a sentence. "Give me your phone. I want to see our joint accounts right now." Savannah pressed her back flat against the expensive silk wallpaper, her eyes darting frantically like a trapped animal. She clutched her designer handbag tightly to her chest, her knuckles turning bone white. When Jamal took a single step toward her, her breathing suddenly hitched. She let out a loud theatrical gasp, bringing a trembling hand to her throat. Her knees buckled just enough to be dramatic, but not enough to wrinkle her pristine black morning dress, and she slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, heaving out ragged, exaggerated breaths. Patricia practically shoved Jamal out of the way, dropping to her knees beside her golden child. She began rubbing Savannah's shoulders, glaring up at Jamal with venomous maternal rage. "Look what you are doing to her!" Patricia screeched, fanning Savannah's face with a cocktail napkin. "She is having a medical emergency. How dare you interrogate your grieving wife about banking passwords on the day we laid her grandfather to rest? You are completely heartless." Jamal did not blink. He stood towering over the two of them, his posture rigidly professional, evaluating his wife with the cold diagnostic precision of a seasoned trauma surgeon assessing a fake injury. His voice was utterly devoid of sympathy. "She is hyperventilating on purpose, Patricia. Her coloring is perfectly fine, and her pulse is visibly steady." Savannah stopped the amateur theatrics and handed over the unlocked device. "If you have nothing to hide regarding my surgical income, proving it should take less than 10 seconds. Savannah let out a loud wail, burying her face into Patricia's shoulder, refusing to look at her husband. Richard, realizing he had entirely lost control of his son-in-law, violently shifted his aggressive focus back to his favorite target. He spun around, his heavy dress shoes stomping hard against the hardwood floor as he marched directly into my personal space. The scent of stale scotch and expensive cologne rolled off him in a suffocating wave. He pointed a thick, trembling finger inches from my nose. "You did this," Richard snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You waltzed back into our lives after 15 years of absolute silence just to tear this family to shreds. You could not stand seeing your sister happily married and living a life of luxury while you scrape by at some pathetic little computer job. You had to poison Jamal against us. You are a toxic, jealous, vindictive failure. Audrey and I am going to make you pay for ruining this day." I stood my ground, refusing to retreat even a single inch from his looming frame. I smoothed the lapel of my custom-tailored jacket, a garment that cost more than his first car, and met his furious gaze with absolute calm. "I did not ruin anything, Dad. I simply provided Jamal with a factual bank statement. Savannah chose to forge my signature. Patricia chose to hurl insults. You chose to burn a legal trust document. All I have done today is watch you all happily construct your own gallows." Richard let out a harsh, barking laugh, shaking his head with aggressive arrogance. "You think you are so untouchable because you managed to steal your grandfather's money? You think that cash makes you powerful. It does not. Money without connections is just paper, Audrey. And in the real corporate world, I hold all the cards. I know exactly how your little tech industry operates. You are just a low-level code monkey, entirely replaceable, entirely insignificant." He stepped back and reached into his jacket, pulling out his sleek smartphone. He tapped the screen with angry, forceful jabs. "You want to play hardball with me in my own house? I will show you what real power looks like. My logistics empire moves billions of dollars of freight globally every single year. We contract our entire digital security infrastructure through Sentinel Cybersecurity, the absolute biggest firm in the country. I personally play golf with their board of directors every other weekend. I have their private cell numbers on speed dial. I tilted my head slightly, offering him a cool, unimpressed smile. Sentinel Cybersecurity. That is a very impressive firm, Richard. They handle federal defense contracts. I hear their encryption protocols are absolutely flawless. They are. Richard boasted, puffing out his chest, completely missing the dangerous calm in my tone. And I pay them millions annually to keep my supply chain secure. I am one of their top-tier legacy clients. One phone call from me and I will have you blacklisted from every tech firm in North America. I will tell the board that you are a liability, a corporate spy, a thief. I will make sure you never touch a keyboard in corporate America again. You will be blackballed from the entire industry by tomorrow morning. I gestured gracefully toward the phone in his hand. Do it. Call them right now. Put them on speakerphone. Let us see exactly how much power you truly hold. Richard sneered, taking my bait without a single second of hesitation. He scrolled to his contacts, pressed a name, and hit the speaker icon, holding the phone up triumphantly between us. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Richard, my friend. This is Arthur. It is a Sunday. What can I do for you? Arthur? Richard barked, his voice dripping with absolute, unquestionable authority. I need a massive personal favor. I have a major security concern regarding a girl in the tech sector, and I need you to utterly crush her career. She is completely unhinged. Flag her name across your networks and ensure she is blacklisted from the industry. Her name is Audrey. The line went completely dead silent. The heavy quiet stretched on for 5 agonizing seconds. Richard frowned, shaking his phone slightly. Arthur, did you even hear me? Arthur finally spoke, his voice trembling with a sudden, profound panic. Richard, Audrey is our chief executive officer. She owns the entire company. Monday morning arrived with sterile precision. My office at Sentinel Cybersecurity sat 40 stories above the city, a fortress of glass and brushed steel. It was a departure from the suffocating cigar smoke-infused caverns my father preferred. Power was code executed flawlessly across a global network. I sat behind my desk, tracking the cascading green text on my primary monitor. The termination protocol for the Blackwood Logistics contract was running its final sequence. I watched as access nodes were severed, encryption keys revoked, and firewall perimeters dissolved. At 8:15, the screen flashed a single confirmation prompt. Contract terminated. Outside my glass walls, the polished tranquility of the executive floor shattered. The heavy doors at the end of the corridor burst open, hitting the magnetic stops. Richard marched through the bullpen, his face a terrifying crimson. He was flanked by 2 building security guards desperately trying to grab his arms, but he shoved them away with the frantic strength of a man whose universe was collapsing. He did not look like an untouchable titan of industry. His expensive custom-tailored suit jacket was wrinkled, his silk tie violently yanked to the side, and cold sweat coated his forehead. He forcefully threw his full weight against my glass office door, shattering the quiet atmosphere. The guards lunged into the room right behind him. I raised a single hand, signaling them to stand down. They hesitated, eyeing my father nervously, before slowly backing out and pulling the glass door shut. Turn them back on! Richard roared, his voice cracking with raw panic. Turn my servers back on right this second. Every single one of my distribution centers is paralyzed. My fleet tracking systems are dark. 300 cargo ships are sitting idle in international ports because customs cannot verify the manifests. I have clients screaming at me on 6 different phone lines. My entire global supply chain has been frozen dead. I picked up my porcelain coffee mug, took a slow sip, and set it back down. I am afraid I cannot do that, Richard. Sentinel Cybersecurity no longer provides services to your logistics firm. Your enterprise tier contract was officially terminated 15 minutes ago. You should have received the automated notification. Richard marched up to my desk, slamming both hands down onto the glass surface. You cannot unilaterally terminate an enterprise contract of that magnitude. We have a legally binding agreement. I pay your firm $8 million a year to maintain my infrastructure. You are legally obligated to provide continuous coverage. I have my entire legal team drafting a massive lawsuit. I will strip this building down to the studs and take every penny you own. I did not flinch. I simply leaned back in my chair and folded my hands neatly. You should perhaps instruct your expensive legal team to read the fine print of the agreement they signed, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The termination clause regarding moral hazard and compliance violations. Sentinel Cybersecurity reserves the absolute right to immediately sever all protective protocols and terminate the contract if the client is found utilizing our encrypted networks to conduct illicit, fraudulent, or highly illegal activities. Richard scoffed loudly, a harsh sound that echoed off the glass. Do not try to hide your petty familial revenge behind some fabricated corporate policy. We both know exactly what this is. You are throwing a pathetic tantrum because I demanded you return your grandfather's money. You are using your little tech company to extort me. It is highly illegal. Turn the servers back on immediately, or I swear I will have you arrested by federal marshals before lunchtime. He leaned menacingly over my desk, his bloodshot eyes bulging with manic aggression. I am giving you exactly 10 seconds to flip the switch and restore my network, he growled. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my blazer and looked him directly in the eyes. I did not touch my keyboard. I did not reach for a telephone to call security. Instead, I reached out and firmly grasped the edge of my massive curved primary monitor. With a smooth, practiced motion, I physically rotated the screen until it directly faced my father. Richard blinked, his furious expression faltering as he stared at the complex dashboard displayed on the monitor. He did not understand code, but he understood the universally recognizable formatting of federal banking alerts. Our military-grade encryption firewall does an exceptional job of keeping malicious hackers out of a corporate network, I explained, walking around the edge of my desk to stand beside him. But it also creates a massive, impenetrable digital shield around your internal operations. When I terminated your contract 15 minutes ago, that shield instantly dropped. Your network was suddenly completely exposed to the open internet. Richard stared blankly at the screen, his breathing growing shallow as he watched hundreds of red notifications multiplying rapidly across the dashboard. You see, Richard? I continued, my tone clinical and detached. Federal regulatory agencies utilize automated audit bots that constantly scan the open web for financial discrepancies, unverified offshore wire transfers, and unregistered accounts. While my firewall was up, those bots could not see a single thing happening inside your empire. But the absolute second that shield fell, the regulatory bots automatically pinged your raw, unprotected accounting ledgers. The detailed financial flowcharts painted a devastatingly clear picture. They immediately detected the massive shell corporations you set up in the Cayman Islands, I said, pointing to the cascading alerts. They instantly flagged the systemic embezzlement of employee pension funds. They categorized over $400 million in fraudulent international shipping invoices you used to aggressively inflate your stock. Richard began to physically tremble violently. The arrogant, untouchable aura he had worn like armor his entire life completely evaporated. His mouth opened and closed rapidly, but he simply could not force any words past his suddenly dry throat. He backed away from the monitor, staring at me with absolute terror. I certainly didn't breach the contract, Dad. I just stopped hiding your felonies. Stepping into my private elevator, I pressed the button for the ground floor. The heavy, polished steel doors slid shut, sealing away my father's frantic pleas as his logistics empire rapidly disintegrated on my monitors. The digital guillotine had finally dropped. The elevator chimed softly, opening into the expansive, sunlit atrium of Sentinel Cybersecurity headquarters. The lobby featured walls of smart glass white marble and a massive security checkpoint. As I stepped onto the marble floor, a sharp screech shattered the quiet hum. Audrey Savannah screamed, her voice echoing violently. Savannah was sprinting blindly across the wide lobby, ignoring the velvet ropes and the warning shouts from the front desk. She looked absolutely unhinged. Her designer trench coat hung haphazardly off one shoulder. Her flawless blowout was a tangled mess, and mascara smudged beneath her wide, panicked eyes. She had bypassed the screening protocol by slipping through the turnstiles behind a group of vendors. Two large security guards immediately broke away to intercept her, but I raised my hand, signaling them to hold back. Let her speak. Savannah stopped 3 feet in front of me, vibrating with manic energy. She pointed a manicured finger at my face. You are going to fix this right now, she commanded, her voice cracking. Dad just called from your office. He is having a complete breakdown. He says his accounts are frozen and federal agents are knocking on his warehouse doors. You have to stop the audit. I stared at her, marveling at her absolute lack of comprehension. You cannot simply stop a federal audit, Savannah. The regulatory bots have indexed the fraudulent ledgers. The data is securely transmitted to the authorities. Dad built his lifestyle on offshore shell companies and stolen pension funds. I just removed the digital blindfold. Savannah stomped her foot on the marble floor like a petulant toddler. I do not care about the technical details, she shrieked, drawing shocked stares from executives crossing the lobby. Dad says he needs exactly $50 million to post emergency collateral and pay off the auditors before the board removes him. You are the CEO of this company. You have that cash liquid. You need to wire $50 million into his holding account this second. You owe this family. A cold laugh escaped my lips. You genuinely believe you can bribe federal investigators with $50 million, I asked in pure disbelief. And you expect me to fund this monumental felony, Savannah? Your ignorance is astounding. Dad is facing 20 years in federal prison for corporate embezzlement. There is no magic check that makes this disappear. His empire is gone, and your endless supply of trust fund cash went down with the ship. Savannah's face violently twisted into an ugly feral snarl. The realization that her prestigious social standing was evaporating completely broke her fragile grip on reality. You are destroying this family, she screamed. You always hated us. You always wanted to ruin my life because you are nothing but a jealous, vindictive monster. She lunged forward, raising her right hand high in the air, aiming a vicious slap directly at my face. I did not even flinch. Before her hand could complete its arc, the two security guards moved with terrifying speed. One guard seamlessly stepped between us, catching Savannah's wrist midair with an iron grip. The second guard firmly grasped her shoulder, twisting her arms downward and locking her securely into place. Savannah thrashed wildly against their hold, kicking her expensive heels against the marble floor, letting out a series of high-pitched shrieks. "Let me go right now!" she yelled. "I will sue you and this building." "Audrey, tell them to release me right now." I stepped closer to her, my posture perfectly relaxed, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You claim that I am destroying this family, Savannah," I said, maintaining absolute eye contact. "But this family was destroyed the moment you decided cruelty was acceptable. Do you remember Christmas Eve when we were teenagers? The year you invited all the wealthy kids from prep school over for a party? I had walked home from my shift at the grocery store. It was 20 degrees outside, heavily snowing, and I had forgotten my key. I knocked on the glass patio doors. You looked right at me. Your friends laughed, asking who the pathetic girl shivering in the snow was. Instead of opening the door, you smiled, locked the deadbolt, and pulled the velvet curtain shut. You left your sister outside in a blizzard for 3 hours to impress shallow teenagers. You risked my physical safety because my cheap coat embarrassed your aesthetic. You only care about appearances. You stole my college fund to buy a luxury house you could not afford, and I am officially cutting off the bankroll. Before Savannah could launch into another hysterical defense, the heavy revolving doors at the front entrance spun open. A tall figure stepped into the sunlit lobby. It was Jamal. He still wore his dark gray surgical scrubs under a sleek, tailored overcoat, his posture radiating a rigid, terrifying calm. Savannah spotted him immediately. Her panicked expression vanished, replaced by a mask of desperate relief. She twisted against the security guards, reaching out toward her husband. "Jamal," she cried out, her voice pitching into a pathetic whimper. "Thank God you are here. Please, you have to help me. Audrey is having her guards physically assault me. Tell them to let me go. Take me home, please." Jamal did not rush to her side. He walked across the marble floor with slow, deliberate steps, his face completely unreadable. He stopped directly in front of Savannah, looking at her not as a husband, but as a man viewing a stranger who thoroughly disgusted him. He reached inside his overcoat and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. Jamal extended his arm and calmly pressed the envelope firmly against her chest. "You are officially served," Savannah Jamal said. "I want a divorce today." The manila envelope hit Savannah's chest before slipping from her trembling hands and slapping the polished marble floor. She stared down at the divorce papers, her breath hitching in her throat, paralyzed by the sudden collapse of her curated reality. The frantic energy that had fueled her attempted assault vanished, replaced by a hollow, gaping silence. She opened her mouth to spin another web of lies, but no sound came out. Jamal did not wait for a response. He turned his back on her, his posture rigid, and his jaw tightly clenched. He looked at me, his eyes exhausted, carrying the heavy weight of a man who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground. "Come upstairs, Jamal," I said, gesturing toward the elevator bank. "You do not need to stand here and become a spectacle for my lobby staff." He nodded once, stepping past his frozen wife without a single backward glance. The security guards released Savannah, stepping back and forming a solid wall between her and the elevators. As the door slid shut, Jamal leaned his head back against the mirrored wall and let out a long exhale. The sheer exhaustion radiating from him was palpable. My office offered a stark contrast to the lobby. It was silent, insulated, and filled with natural light. Jamal walked straight to the leather sofa and sank heavily into the cushions. He dropped his face into his hands before looking at me. I knew Savannah was materialistic. Jamal began, his voice stripped of its usual resonance. I knew she cared about country clubs, designer labels, luxury cars. I accepted that because I loved her. I thought my surgical income simply funded her tastes. But I never looked closely at the routing numbers. I trusted my wife to manage our accounts. He pulled out his phone, the screen still illuminated with the financial dashboard he pulled up earlier. He tossed the device onto my glass coffee table. It clattered, spinning until it pointed directly at me. "Look at the outgoing transfers," Jamal commanded, his tone shifting to cold anger. "Go back 3 years. Look at the shell accounts." I leaned forward and scanned the digital ledger. What I saw made my blood run cold. Row after row of massive withdrawals. Tens of thousands of dollars transferred out every single month, funneled through a maze of obscure LLCs. With my background in cybersecurity, the tactics were transparent. Every shell company routed directly into the primary operating accounts of Richard's failing logistics empire. "She has been bleeding you dry," I said, softly tracing the digital trail of financial ruin. For 3 years, Jamal confirmed, his voice vibrating with rage. "My surgical income, my bonuses, my investments. Savannah has been systematically siphoning my money to prop up your father's business. Richard's billionaire lifestyle is a complete fabrication. His company has been hemorrhaging cash for years, and he used my money to keep the lights on and the yachts fueled. The private jets, the charity galas, the extravagant dinners where they treated me like a charity case. I paid for all of it." The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. Savannah had not just stolen my college fund to buy a house. She actively transformed her husband into an ATM to maintain her family's social standing. Jamal had financed the very arrogance they hurled at him daily. Before Jamal could continue, the heavy doors of my office violently swung open. My assistant stumbled backward, trying to block the intruder. "I am so sorry, Miss Wilson," my assistant stammered. She just pushed right past security on the lobby level. Patricia stormed into the room, her face a mask of frantic desperation. She looked disheveled, her expensive scarf hanging loosely around her neck. She completely ignored my presence, treating me as though I were invisible. She rushed directly toward the leather sofa and dropped to her knees in front of Jamal. "Jamal, please," Patricia begged, grabbing his hands. Her voice was shrill, weaponizing guilt. "You cannot do this. You cannot abandon Savannah. She is downstairs having a nervous breakdown. She loves you. You took vows to stand by her. You cannot throw away your marriage over a simple misunderstanding. We are family. You belong with us. Jamal slowly pulled his hands away. He looked down at my mother with absolute disgust. A misunderstanding. Patricia, Jamal asked, his voice low. Savannah has been stealing millions from my surgical accounts for 3 years to keep your husband out of bankruptcy court. She drained my life savings to fund your country club memberships. That is not a misunderstanding. That is grand larceny. Patricia waved her hand frantically, brushing off the accusation of massive financial fraud, as if Jamal had complained about a minor scheduling conflict. Oh, do not be so dramatic, Jamal. Patricia scoffed, her voice, taking on that patronizingly sweet tone she used to rewrite reality. You make an exorbitant amount of money. You barely even noticed it was gone. Besides, it was never a permanent arrangement. It was just a temporary loan. Richard was going to pay you back every single cent the absolute second Theodore's inheritance cleared the probate courts. The words hung in the air of my office like a live grenade. Patricia immediately slapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer terror as she realized what had slipped out. She had been so desperate to minimize Savannah's crimes that she accidentally confessed to the entire conspiracy. Jamal sat perfectly still, the blood draining from his face as the horrific truth clicked into place. The betrayal was not isolated to his vain wife. It was systematic. It was generational. You knew, Jamal whispered, the horrifying realization echoing in the quiet room. You and Richard knew she was stealing my money. You orchestrated it. You used me as a human ATM, and your entire plan relied on waiting for an old man to die so you could steal his money to replace mine. Jamal did not scream or throw anything. The absolute silence following his realization was far more devastating than any physical outburst. He looked down at Patricia, still kneeling on my office carpet. Jamal slowly backed away, his scrubs rustling softly, offering me a silent acknowledgement of the nightmare I had warned him about. He turned and walked out the door without looking back. Patricia scrambled to her feet and lunged toward the exit. I pressed a button under my desk. 2 security guards materialized, instantly blocking her path. Escort her out, I instructed, my voice flat. Patricia thrashed against their grip, her face contorted in pure venom. You think you have won? She shrieked, her heels dragging across the carpet. You are a psychotic, vindictive little girl. I will ruin you in our social circle. Her threats were the desperate flailing of a woman who built her entire identity on stolen money. But Patricia was dangerously resilient when her social standing was threatened. 3 days later, the Whispering Pines Country Club charity gala provided her the perfect battlefield. Patricia was the head of the organizing committee this year, a position leveraged with Richard's embezzled funds. I arrived at the country club just after 8 o'clock. The grand ballroom was draped in white silk filled with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Wearing a minimalist, tailored sapphire blue evening gown, I stood near the entrance watching my mother hold court near the ice sculpture. She was entirely surrounded by her closest wealthy socialite friends, projecting an aura of absolute perfection. I slipped behind a floral arrangement to listen. Oh, Jamal and Savannah are perfectly fine, Patricia was saying with an elegant laugh. Jamal is simply exhausted from work. You know how trauma surgeons get. He is working ridiculous hours and is terribly stressed. They just need a quiet weekend in the Hamptons. And Audrey, one woman, asked, her voice hushed with scandalous curiosity. Patricia sighed heavily, placing a hand over her heart to feign maternal tragedy. It breaks my heart to say this, but Audrey is experiencing a severe psychotic breakdown. She has always been fiercely jealous of her sister, and unfortunately, it completely warped her mind. We are looking into psychiatric facilities for her. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement directly into the center of their circle. Good evening, ladies, I said clearly. Patricia choked on her champagne, spilling drops onto her gown. The surrounding women gasped, stepping back slightly, darting nervous glances between us. Patricia stammered, her face draining of color. What are you doing here? I offered a composed smile. I am a platinum tier sponsor for the Children's Hospital Wing, Patricia. My company underwrites this entire event. Please excuse my mother's vivid imagination, I told the women. She is currently dealing with the stress of a federal investigation into her husband's logistics firm. It tends to make her fabricate rather elaborate stories. The socialites exchanged shocked glances, immediately sensing actual verifiable scandal. Patricia's face flushed a furious red. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin, and dragged me toward the silent auction tables set up along the far wall. "You arrogant brat," she hissed through a forced smile, nodding pleasantly to passing guests, while squeezing my arm tight. "You are not going to embarrass me here. I am the queen of this club." She abruptly stopped before the premier auction item, a deed to a coveted piece of waterfront real estate. The current bid was listed at $800,000. Patricia snatched the luxury pen resting beside the bid sheet. "You want to play games and pretend you have power?" she whispered maliciously. "Watch how real power operates." She dramatically slashed her signature across the sheet, writing a bid for $1.2 million. "We were looking for a new location for Savannah's fashion line anyway," Patricia announced loudly, ensuring several prominent club members heard her. "It is just pocket change for us." I looked at the sheet, calmly picked up the pen, and wrote $1.5 million. Patricia sneered, snatching the pen back and writing $2 million. She reached into her designer clutch and pulled out one of Richard's black corporate credit cards, slamming it onto the table for the auction director. "Run it right now," she commanded, projecting her voice to the growing crowd. "Let us show this psychotic girl what actual wealth looks like. I am closing this bid." The frantic auction director nodded and inserted the black card into his terminal. The crowd of socialites pressed closer, eager to witness the lavish display of financial dominance. The machine processed for agonizing seconds. Then it let out a sharp, discordant beep. A bright red error message flashed across the tiny screen. The director cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Blackwood, I am terribly sorry," he murmured, trying to keep his voice down. "The card has been declined." Patricia's forced smile vanished. "What? That is impossible." She snapped, her voice rising in panic. "Run it again. The machine must be broken. It is a limitless corporate account." She dug into her designer clutch hands, shaking, and pulled out a personal platinum card. "Here, use this one." The director swiped the second card. Another sharp beep. "Declined again," he whispered, sweat forming on his brow. The socialites surrounding us began to whisper openly, the humiliating reality unfolding before their eyes. Patricia frantically pulled out a third card. Every single piece of plastic she offered flashed red. Her accounts were completely frozen by the federal auditors. I stepped forward, breaking the agonizing silence. I reached into my clutch, pulled out my checkbook, and smoothly uncapped my fountain pen. I wrote a check for $2 million, paying in full, and handed it directly to the auction director. "The transaction is complete," I stated clearly. Patricia stood frozen, her hands clutching a useless stack of plastic, utterly humiliated in front of the very society she worshipped. The silence in the ballroom was broken only by the sharp snap of my fountain pen closing. I slipped the silver instrument back into my clutch, the soft click echoing in the vast, tense space. Patricia remained entirely immobilized, her meticulously contoured face frozen in an expression of sheer horror. The cluster of elite socialites women who had hung on her every fabricated word just moments prior now physically recoiled. They pulled their silk wraps tighter around their shoulders, stepping backward in unison, as if financial ruin were a contagious disease. No one offered my mother a word of comfort. No one stepped forward to salvage her shattered dignity. The absolute silence of her peers was the ultimate condemnation in her world. I did not linger to gloat. The transaction was complete, the point was irrevocably made, and the carefully curated illusion of the Blackwell Empire was officially dead. I turned my back on the murmuring crowd and walked toward the grand exit. My sapphire gown brushed softly against the polished marble floors as I moved through the opulent gilded corridors of the Whispering Pines Country Club. The air inside felt suddenly heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and sudden catastrophic failure. I needed the crisp night air. The heavy doors of the country club swung open, yielding to the cool breeze of the evening. The transition from the stifling atmosphere of the gala to the quiet serenity of the valet portico was immediate and refreshing. I approached the podium, retrieving my ticket from my clutch, and handed it to the attendant. He nodded politely, immediately sprinting down the curved cobblestone driveway to retrieve my vehicle. I stood alone under the warm glow of the gas lanterns, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The night was peaceful, the distant sounds of the city completely muted by the sprawling manicured golf courses surrounding the estate. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, allowing the profound victory of the evening to settle into my bones. For decades, I had been forced to shrink myself, to suppress my intelligence, and to hide my success just to maintain the fragile ego of a family that despised me. Tonight, the invisible chains had finally snapped. But the tranquility of the moment was violently interrupted. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the stone walkway behind me, growing louder and more aggressive with every passing second. Before I could even turn my head to assess the approaching threat, a massive, bruising hand clamped down viciously on my bare shoulder. The sheer force of the grip spun me around entirely, sending a sharp jolt of pain radiating down my arm. I stumbled backward, my heels scraping against the rough cobblestone until my spine slammed hard against the stone pillar of the valet station. Richard loomed over me, his massive frame blocking out the ambient light of the portico. His face was twisted into a grotesque mask of unadulterated fury. The veins in his thick neck bulged against the stiff collar of his tuxedo shirt, and the overpowering stench of aged scotch rolled off his heavy, ragged breath. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were wide with a manic, desperate rage. "You vindictive, psychotic little witch!" Richard snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that vibrated with menace. He tightened his bruising grip on my collarbone, stepping so close that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Do you have any idea what you just did in there? You think you are so clever, parading your money around, making a laughingstock out of my wife in front of the entire executive board. Patricia is locked in the powder room having a complete nervous breakdown. She cannot even show her face in this town again." I kept my expression entirely neutral, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. "Remove your hand from me right now," I demanded, my voice icy and unwavering. Richard let out a dark, mocking laugh, leaning his full body weight forward to trap me against the masonry. "You do not give orders here, Audrey. You never did. You orchestrated this entire humiliating spectacle just to destroy her. I will not let some arrogant, ungrateful brat tear down my family legacy. I will teach you the respect you clearly lack." He raised his right hand, pulling it back, as his hand curled into a tight, trembling fist. I braced my core, my eyes locked defiantly on his, entirely prepared to defend myself against the physical violence he had threatened for years. Before his arm could begin its downward arc, a blinding beam of LED headlights swept across the dark driveway. An extended custom black limousine pulled aggressively into the valet lane, its heavy tires screeching to a sudden halt, mere inches from where we stood. The abrupt noise and sudden illumination startled Richard, causing him to freeze in his tracks. He lowered his hand instinctively, squinting against the harsh, unforgiving glare of the headlights. The heavy rear door of the limousine clicked open, and a man stepped out onto the cobblestone. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. It was Marcus Sterling, the legendary venture capitalist. He managed a portfolio worth tens of billions and held the power to resurrect or destroy entire global industries. Richard recognized him instantly. The violent, threatening monster vanished in less than a heartbeat, instantly replaced by the subservient, desperate sycophant that had crawled his way into high society. Richard hurriedly smoothed his wrinkled tuxedo jacket, plastered an obsequious business smile across his flushed face, and turned his back on me entirely. "Marcus Sterling," Richard exclaimed, extending his hand eagerly. "I am Richard Blackwood. I would love to discuss a highly lucrative logistics venture with you." The investor completely ignored Richard's outstretched hand, turned directly to me, and asked, "Audrey, is this the man whose debt we are buying out for pennies on the dollar?" The blood drained from Richard's face. Marcus Sterling's question hung in the freezing air, a definitive death sentence for the Blackwood Empire. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. His eyes darted frantically between the billionaire venture capitalist and me, his mind finally grasping the catastrophic reality of his situation. I was not just a rebellious daughter, I was his executioner. Marcus offered me a courteous nod, gesturing toward the open door of his limousine. I stepped inside, the plush leather offering an immediate sanctuary. As the long black vehicle glided away from the country club, I looked out the tinted window. Richard remained paralyzed on the cobblestone driveway, a broken, desperate man watching his stolen legacy evaporate into the night. 3 weeks passed. The federal auditors continued to strangle Richard's operating accounts, freezing assets and seizing offshore ledgers. Yet the illusion of high society was a powerful narcotic. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and despite staring down the barrel of imminent federal indictments, Richard and Patricia refused to cancel their annual elite family dinner. They booked the exclusive private dining room at the Whispering Pines Country Club, desperate to project an image of untouchable wealth to their extended circle of leeches. They were funding the extravagant feast by pawning Patricia's hidden jewelry. I received my formal invitation via courier, a desperate attempt by my parents to pretend the family was still united. I accepted. I had one final card to play. I arrived at the country club just as the first course was being served. I bypassed the valet and strode through the grand lobby. I was not wearing my usual modest clothing. I wore a bespoke tailored ivory silk suit crafted by a premier designer in Milan. The cut was razor-sharp, accentuating a posture I had spent years hiding. A pair of flawless diamond studs caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. Every inch of my presentation screamed absolute, undeniable self-made wealth. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the private dining room. The long mahogany table was crowded with aunts, uncles, and cousins, all happily consuming expensive wine paid for with stolen funds. The lively conversation died instantly as I crossed the threshold. Patricia gripped her wine glass, her knuckles turning white. Savannah glared at me from across the table with unadulterated venom. I took the empty seat at the far end, sitting with perfect composure. The extended family exchanged nervous glances, entirely unaware of the impending destruction. Aunt Beatrice, my father's older sister, decided to break the silence. She thrived on enforcing the family's cruel hierarchy. She leaned forward, eyeing my ivory suit with a theatrical scoff. "Audrey, what an incredibly severe outfit," Beatrice sneered. "Are you trying to look like a corporate banker today? It is quite a departure from your usual drab aesthetic. Honestly, it reminds me of that dreadful incident at your high school senior prom. Do you remember Savannah was kind enough to let Audrey borrow her old designer gown, and Audrey somehow managed to show up looking like a complete disaster?" The memory flared in my mind, sharp and vivid. I was 17. Patricia had refused to buy me a prom dress. Savannah had magnanimously offered me her gown from the previous year. What Beatrice failed to mention to the laughing table was the truth behind that generous gesture. Savannah had deliberately taken a pair of fabric scissors and slashed the internal seams of the dress just minutes before I left. I spent my entire senior prom hiding in the gymnasium bathroom, frantically using safety pins to hold the shredded fabric together, while Savannah and her friends pointed and laughed. The family knew exactly what she had done, and they celebrated her cruelty as a hilarious prank. I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. I looked directly into Beatrice's patronizing eyes, my expression utterly void of emotion. "I prefer dressing like the person who owns the bank, Beatrice," I stated, my voice echoing clearly off the wood-paneled walls. "And speaking of banks, I think you might want to pay very close attention to page 4 of this document." I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out a heavily bound dossier, and tossed it down the length of the table. It slid smoothly across the polished mahogany and slammed directly into Beatrice's bone china plate. The heavy thud caused her crystal wine glass to topple, spilling dark red liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. Beatrice gasped, jumping back as the wine stained her dress. "What is the meaning of this?" Uncle Arthur, Beatrice's husband, demanded, his face turning a furious shade of crimson as he reached for the dossier. "I suggest you read it, Arthur," I instructed coldly. "That dossier details how you have been knowingly signing off on fraudulent invoices to funnel Richard's embezzled funds into your own offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands." Arthur froze. His hand hovered over the dossier, trembling visibly. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking as corpse-like as Richard had 3 weeks prior. "You have been fully complicit in a massive federal tax evasion scheme for over 5 years." I continued, my tone entirely steady. "You helped Richard steal millions of dollars from honest investors. The documents in that folder are merely copies. The original files are currently sitting directly on the desk of the lead investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. They are preparing the criminal indictments right now as we speak." The silence that engulfed the private dining room was absolute and suffocating. No one moved a single trembling muscle. No one dared to utter a single word. The arrogant smirks and cruel, patronizing glances were completely gone, replaced by sudden, visceral dread. Every extended relative sitting at that massive mahogany table slowly realized the terrifying, undeniable truth. I was no longer the quiet, compliant family punching bag they could comfortably step on. I held the heavy keys to all of their complete financial ruin. Richard pressed the red square on the screen, abruptly ending the recording. His chest heaved as he shoved the device back across the polished mahogany desk. He wiped a thick bead of sweat from his temple, his eyes wild with a mixture of profound humiliation and greedy anticipation. He had just sold his soul, explicitly detailing how he orchestrated the theft of my college fund and manipulated Grandpa Theodore's offshore accounts. He confessed to using Savannah as the primary funnel for the laundered cash. The heavy silence in the room was absolute, but it only lasted for a single second. The heavy oak door of the private dining room violently crashed against the wall, the brass handle denting the expensive wallpaper. Savannah stormed into the room, her designer gown swirling around her ankles, her face a mask of unadulterated fury. She had clearly been pressing her ear against the hardwood, listening to every damning word her father had just immortalized on video. Her usual pristine composure was entirely shattered. She marched directly toward Richard, her hands clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists at her sides, her breathing ragged and shallow as she prepared to unleash a torrent of pure rage. "You threw me under the bus!" Savannah shrieked, her shrill voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You sat there and blamed me for the Cayman transfers. You told her that I was the mastermind behind laundering Theodore's estate money. I only signed those shell company documents because you told me it was a standard tax loophole. You said I was helping the family business survive a temporary cash flow issue. You manipulated me into committing federal wire fraud, and now you are sacrificing me to save your own pathetic skin. I will not go to federal prison for your mistakes." Richard jumped up from his leather chair, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do not play the innocent victim with me, Savannah," he roared back, slamming his heavy palms flat against the desk. "You knew exactly where that cash was coming from. You eagerly spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of stolen money on your ridiculous lifestyle. You bought luxury cars, funded your failed fashion startup, and financed your endless country club galas with funds I siphoned from Theodore's accounts. You were perfectly happy to reap the rewards of my crimes until the federal auditors actually showed up. The golden child and the narcissist were finally turning on each other, tearing their fabricated family loyalty to shreds. I sat perfectly still, observing the spectacular implosion of the Blackwood Empire. Savannah stepped closer to her father, her eyes narrowing with vicious intent. "If you think I am going down alone, you are entirely delusional," she spat out. "I have carefully kept precise records of every single transaction you forced me to execute. I know exactly how you stole the remaining balance from Grandma Eleanor's medical trust last year. I know you forged her signature while she was heavily medicated. Patricia, who had been cowering near the fireplace, let out a horrified gasp. Richard, you promised me you never touched my mother's medical fund, she cried, rushing forward and grabbing his arm. You swore that money was safely locked in escrow. Richard violently shook Patricia off, his eyes entirely fixed on his enraged daughter. Keep your mouth shut, Savannah, he warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You are crossing a line you cannot uncross. Do not pretend you possess any moral high ground. I know about the missing charity funds from the Children's Hospital benefit gala last spring. Savannah froze, the color rapidly draining from her cheeks. Richard pressed his sudden advantage, stepping toward her with a predatory sneer. Yes, I saw the discrepancies in the country club ledgers. He continued, his tone dripping with malicious triumph. You skimmed over $200,000 from sick children to pay off your private credit card debts. You are just as corrupt and greedy as anyone else in this room. If the authorities investigate my corporate accounts, I will personally ensure they audit your precious, fraudulent charitable foundation. We will most definitely share adjoining cells in the federal penitentiary system. Stop it, both of you, Patricia shrieked, positioning herself between her husband and her favorite daughter. Are you entirely insane? You are confessing to multiple federal felonies at the top of your lungs. Audrey is sitting right there. She gestured frantically toward me, panic finally overriding her paralyzing shock. You are handing her the ammunition to destroy our entire family. She is going to ruin everything we have built. Patricia's frantic pleas were utterly useless. The mutual destruction was already fully underway, fueled by decades of unchecked greed, suffocating arrogance, and the desperate instinct to ensure their own ultimate survival. I ignored Patricia's shrieking completely. While my family continued their vicious verbal slaughter, I calmly picked up my phone from the desk. The video file was massive, containing over 10 minutes of Richard explicitly detailing his vast financial crimes, now augmented by Savannah's screamed admissions. I tapped the screen 3 times, executing a secure command. A small green check mark appeared, confirming the explosive video was actively syncing to my encrypted cloud server. The upload finished in seconds. The undeniable proof of their systemic corruption was now safely locked away in a digital fortress they could never even hope to breach. Richard suddenly turned away from Savannah, breathing heavily as he focused his desperate attention back on me. He extended his trembling hand across the desk. I gave you exactly what you wanted, Audrey, he demanded, his voice thick with entitled arrogance and thinly veiled desperation. I made the confession. Now execute the wire transfer. Send the $50 million to my account immediately. I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk suit. I slipped my phone into my pocket and looked him dead in the eye. I said I would consider it. I considered it. The answer is no. The absolute finality of my refusal hung in the stagnant air. The universe held its breath. I watched the realization of inescapable ruin wash over Richard. The arrogant patriarch, the man who dictated my worth my entire life, deflated right before my eyes. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly gray. His jaw slacked as his eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for a loophole that could save him. None existed. I cornered him entirely. Savannah stood frozen, processing the prison time attached to her televised confession. She had unwittingly handed me the final nail for their coffin. Then Patricia's sanity utterly broke. She could not comprehend a world where she was not the revered matriarch of a wealthy, untouchable empire. To her, my refusal was pure treason. A guttural, horrific shriek erupted from the back of her throat. It was not a scream of fear, but the primal howl of a wounded animal. Her manicured hand shot out, fingers wrapping aggressively around the stem of her heavy crystal wine goblet. She hurled the glass directly at my head with all the force she could muster. I stepped to the right, my movements fluid and unpanicked. The heavy crystal sailed past my shoulder, missing my face by mere inches. It smashed violently against the dark mahogany paneling of the wall behind me. The glass exploded into 1,000 glittering shards that rained down upon the plush carpet. Dark Cabernet splashed across the pristine wallpaper, dripping down the polished wood like a fresh, gruesome wound. The shattering noise was deafening acting, as the starting pistol for absolute bedlam. The remaining extended family members shrieked in terror, scrambling backward in their heavy wooden chairs, desperately trying to escape the unpredictable blast radius of Patricia's violent mental breakdown. Aunt Beatrice covered her head, whimpering as the illusion of their superiority shattered along with the fine crystal. Richard did not freeze. The sound of shattering glass ignited the last reserves of his violent, narcissistic rage. The groveling, begging father vanished, replaced by the terrifying monster who had ruled our home through intimidation for decades. He let out a furious roar and lunged directly across the massive dining table. He did not care about the extravagant feast laid out before him. His heavy knees crashed onto the polished mahogany, crushing the silver serving platters. Fine crystal glasses tipped and shattered under his sudden weight. The silver gravy boat flipped, sending steaming brown liquid pouring onto the expensive Persian rug. The magnificent centerpiece of autumn flowers and tall white candles was completely obliterated as he crawled toward me like a feral beast. I stepped back again, maintaining a safe distance. He scrambled over the ruined Thanksgiving dinner, his hands reaching out to violently grab the collar of my silk suit, his eyes burning with a murderous intent. He wanted to physically tear the compliance out of me to beat me back into the silent, submissive daughter he thought he still owned. He believed physical violence could somehow erase the digital evidence floating safely in the cloud. Before his grasping fingers could make contact with my clothing, the heavy double doors of the private dining room swung open with a resounding crash. The sudden intrusion halted Richard's violent forward momentum. He remained sprawled awkwardly across the ruined dining table, his hands gripping the edges, his chest heaving heavily as he turned his furious gaze toward the entrance. Mr. Vance, the senior manager of the Whispering Pines Country Club, stood in the doorway. His usually impassive face was set into a mask of stone-cold authority. Flanking him on either side were two massive security guards, their hands resting cautiously near the utility belts on their waists. They took in the chaotic scene: the shattered crystal, the wine-stained walls, the ruined feast, and the patriarch of the Blackwood family crawling across a table like a madman. Richard instantly attempted to weaponize his elite status. He scrambled off the table, straightening his stained tuxedo jacket, his face flushing a furious, indignant red. He pointed a trembling, commanding finger directly at my face, reverting seamlessly to the arrogant billionaire persona he had perfected over 30 years of deception. "Mr. Vance, it is about time you arrived." Richard barked, his voice dripping with misplaced entitlement. "This woman has completely lost her mind. She crashed our private holiday dinner, began causing a severe disruption, and is currently threatening my family. I demand that you have your security personnel physically remove her from the premises immediately. Throw her out into the street where she belongs. If she resists, call the authorities and have her arrested for trespassing and assault right now." Patricia quickly smoothed her hair and arranged her features into a mask of aristocratic distress. "She is completely unstable," Patricia added, her voice adopting a theatrical, trembling quality. "She is a danger to everyone in this establishment. Remove her at once, or we will be canceling our membership and ensuring the board hears about this severe lapse in your security protocols." I did not defend myself. I did not speak a single word. I simply stood with my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my tailored trousers, watching their pathetic, desperate performance. I waited patiently for the inevitable crushing impact of reality to finally strike them down. Mr. Vance did not look at me. He did not acknowledge Patricia's dramatic threats or her fake trembling voice. He kept his stern, unwavering gaze locked entirely on Richard's flushed, demanding face. The manager stepped confidently into the room, signaling for the two large security guards to step forward and flank the dining table, effectively blocking Richard's path to the exit. "Sir," the manager said, his voice ringing with a cold, terrifying finality that instantly silenced the entire room. "Your credit cards have all declined for this $15,000 dinner. I need an alternative form of payment right now, or I am calling the police." The word police hung in the air of the ruined dining room like a physical blow. The absolute silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the faint, erratic ticking of my father's expensive unpaid watch. The blood that had drained from Richard's face only moments ago now rushed back with a violent, explosive force, turning his skin a mottled beet red. His mouth opened and closed silently, his jaw working as his brain desperately tried to process the sheer, unadulterated humiliation of what had just occurred. In his entire life, surrounded by the elite echelons of Connecticut society, no one had ever dared to challenge his financial solvency. Declined. Richard finally choked out the word, scratching against his vocal cords. He stared at Mr. Vance as if the manager had just sprouted a second head. That is entirely impossible. Run them again. There is obviously a systemic error with your terminal. Mr. Vance did not flinch. His posture remained perfectly rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. I assure you, sir, there is no error on our end. The manager stated, his voice ringing with a cold professional detachment that cut through Richard's bluster. We have attempted to authorize all 4 of the premium credit cards you provided to the front desk this evening. Every single transaction was unequivocally denied by your financial institutions. You currently owe this establishment $15,000 for the catering the premium wine service, and the damages incurred to this room, and I require immediate settlement. Patricia let out a high, strangled gasp covering her face. The remaining extended family members began muttering in panicked whispers. The socialites gathered near the shattered doorway were openly staring. The mighty Blackwood family could not afford their Thanksgiving dinner. Richard's humiliation instantly mutated into a towering, self-righteous rage. He stepped away from the destroyed mahogany table, squaring his broad shoulders as he aggressively closed the distance between himself and the club manager. He poked a thick, trembling finger directly at Mr. Vance's chest. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? Richard bellowed, losing control of his aristocratic persona. I am Richard Blackwood. I have been a Platinum Tier member for 20 consecutive years. I have funded the renovations of your golf courses. You do not disrespect me over a trivial banking glitch. Mr. Vance remained entirely unmoved by the aggressive display. 20 years of past membership does not negate your current financial standing, sir. You are holding a highly exclusive venue hostage while possessing absolutely zero capital to cover your extravagant expenses. Patricia scrambled forward, her silk gown trailing through the spilled wine and shattered glass. She grabbed Richard's arm, her face a mask of aristocratic terror, as she noticed the whispering crowd gathering in the hallway. Richard, please, she hissed, her voice trembling violently. Just give him another card. Give him the black card from the Cayman account. Pay the man so we can salvage whatever is left of our dignity. I do not have the Cayman card, Richard roared, shoving her hand away. His eyes darted frantically around the room, panic finally setting in, as the inescapable reality of his situation cemented itself. The federal auditors had frozen everything. He had nothing left. Absolutely nothing. He turned his wrath back onto the manager. Listen to me very carefully, you insignificant little clerk, Richard snarled, stepping close to Mr. Vance. I am not paying a single dime tonight. You are going to put this entire bill on my house tab. If you refuse, your career in hospitality is permanently terminated. I want to speak to the owner. Go fetch the owner of this club and tell him Richard Blackwood demands his immediate presence. Mr. Vance let out a slow, deeply exhausted sigh. He adjusted his suit jacket, his expression shifting from professional detachment to a quiet, undeniable pity. I am afraid putting this on your house tab is no longer a viable option, Mr. Blackwood. Your membership dues have been severely delinquent for the past 6 months. That is a clerical oversight! Richard screamed, his face contorting with desperate rage. Bring me the owner. I will deal with him directly. I will buy this entire pathetic country club just to have the distinct pleasure of firing you myself. Fetch the owner. Mr. Vance shook his head slightly, his demeanor entirely unfazed by the billionaire's hollow threats. I cannot do that, sir. The previous ownership group officially finalized the sale of the Whispering Pines Country Club yesterday afternoon. We are under completely new management. I do not care if the devil himself bought the deed. Richard spat, pacing like a caged animal. Tell this new owner that Richard Blackwood requires an audience. I am a legacy member. I have guaranteed privileges. The manager sighed again, signaling the two massive security guards to step slightly closer to Richard. I am afraid your legacy status has been permanently revoked, sir. The new owner of this establishment implemented a strict zero-tolerance policy for accounts in arrears over 90 days. Your membership has been officially terminated, making your current presence in this dining room an act of criminal trespassing. Richard froze, the word trespassing hitting him like a bucket of freezing water. What are you talking about? He stammered, his bluster finally breaking under the weight of the manager's absolute authority. You cannot terminate me. You cannot throw me out. Mr. Vance did not respond to Richard. Instead, the manager smoothly pivoted on his heel, turning his back entirely on the sputtering, furious patriarch. He took 3 deliberate steps across the wine-stained carpet, stopping directly in front of where I stood. The entire dining room watched in absolute stunned silence as the senior manager of the most exclusive country club in the state lowered his head and bowed slightly in my direction. Miss Audrey, Mr. Vance said, his voice ringing with absolute respect and subservience. How would you like us to handle these trespassers? I shifted my gaze to the 3 individuals who had made my life a living hell. Richard's face was frozen in horror. Patricia was trembling, clutching her stained silk gown. Savannah looked like a cornered animal. I took a slow breath, savoring the absolute power shifting into my hands. Escort them off the premises immediately, Mr. Vance, I instructed. Use whatever physical force is strictly necessary. Ensure their names are permanently blacklisted from all properties operating under my corporate umbrella. Mr. Vance nodded sharply. Understood, Miss Audrey. Remove these individuals now. The guards moved with terrifying efficiency. The larger one clamped a heavy hand onto Richard's shoulder, spinning him toward the door. Take your hands off me! Richard bellowed, attempting to shake off the guard's grip. Do you have any idea who I am? The guard did not answer. He twisted Richard's arm behind his back, forcing the former billionaire to march awkwardly forward. The second guard approached Patricia and Savannah. Patricia let out a dramatic wail, swatting at the guard's hands. Do not touch me! She shrieked, tears spilling over her powdered cheeks. We are leaving on our own accord. Savannah refused to move, glaring at me. You are going to pay for this, Audrey, she hissed. The guard ignored her empty threat, grabbing her elbow and propelling her toward the doors. The procession out of the private dining room was a spectacular public execution. As the security team forced my family into the grand hallway, the chaotic scene spilled out into the lobby. The whispering socialites Patricia had spent decades trying to impress were already lining the corridor. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes wide with morbid fascination. They did not offer assistance or sympathy. Instead, a sea of glowing smartphone screens rose into the air. Dozens of cameras recorded every humiliating second of the Blackwood family's physical expulsion. Flashbulbs illuminated Patricia's stained dress and ruined makeup. She tried to hide her face behind her manicured hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the elite circle watched her ultimate disgrace. Richard continued to shout impotent threats. I walked paces behind them, maintaining a steady rhythm. I watched the empire crumble in real time, broadcasted instantly to every high society group chat. The glass doors of the country club slid open, thrusting us out into the brutal, freezing night air. The biting wind whipped across the exposed valet portico. The abrupt transition from the heated interior to the harsh reality of the freezing parking lot snapped whatever fragile threads of sanity Richard still possessed. The guards released them at the edge of the cobblestone driveway, pointing toward the exit gates. Do not return, the lead guard warned flatly. Richard stumbled forward, rubbing his shoulder where the guard had gripped him. He spun around his chest, heaving violently, the freezing air turning his ragged breaths into thick white clouds. He looked like a madman, his tuxedo jacket torn, his tie hanging loosely around his thick neck. Patricia collapsed against a stone pillar, shivering violently in the cold. Savannah crossed her arms, glaring daggers at the valet attendants. I walked calmly toward my vehicle, a sleek sedan idling near the podium. Seeing my absolute composure ignited a blinding, destructive rage inside Richard. He let out a primal roar. He spotted a heavy iron golf club resting near the concierge desk. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward, his thick fingers wrapping tightly around the grip. He charged directly at my car, swinging the heavy metal club with terrifying, unhinged momentum. He slammed the iron head violently against the reinforced glass of my driver's side window. A sharp crack echoed through the freezing air, but the armored glass did not shatter. It merely splintered, leaving a spiderweb of white fractures. Richard swung again, panting heavily, his eyes rolling with pure madness. "You stole this from me," he screamed. "You manipulated the board. You stole my property. I will destroy you, Audrey." In the distance, the unmistakable wail of police sirens began to pierce the quiet night. The flashing lights reflected off the dark trees lining the entrance. Richard stopped swinging, lowering the iron club as the sound of the approaching sirens grew deafeningly loud. A sick, triumphant smirk spread slowly across his flushed face. He pointed the tip of the golf club directly at my chest. "Do you hear that, Audrey?" Richard gloated, his voice dripping with arrogance. "That is the sound of your immediate downfall. I called the authorities the second I realized you were tampering with my accounts. I am pressing charges against you for corporate theft, trespassing, and grand larceny. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a federal prison cell. You played a good game, but you severely underestimated me." Patricia stopped sobbing, pushing herself off the stone pillar with a desperate spark of renewed hope. Savannah actually laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that sliced through the freezing wind. 4 police cruisers roared onto the driveway, tires screeching as they boxed in the portico. The flashing strobes painted my family's horrified faces in stark red and blue. The lead cruiser's doors flew open, and 3 armed officers stepped into the freezing night. They wore tactical vests, their expressions serious as they assessed the scene. Richard dropped the club onto the pavement with a clang, puffing out his chest, ready to play the victim. "Officer, thank God you are here," Richard shouted, stepping forward with his hands raised high. "This woman is a dangerous criminal. I demand you handcuff her immediately." The officers did not look my way. They bypassed me, their boots pounding against the stone. Before Richard could utter another word, the lead officer lunged, grabbing the back of his torn tuxedo jacket. He spun the billionaire around and slammed him face first onto the hood of the nearest police cruiser. The metal crumpled slightly under his weight. Patricia screamed out in absolute terror. "Richard, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud." The freezing night air was sucked out of the space around us. Richard pressed his face against the icy metal of the police cruiser, his eyes wide with uncomprehending terror. The steel handcuffs clicked loudly into place around his wrists, echoing over the flashing emergency lights. The invincible patriarch was broken, stripped of his tailored armor, reduced to a shivering suspect pinned against a police car. Patricia shrieked his name, clawing at the air, violently restrained by a female officer. She collapsed onto the frozen asphalt, sobbing uncontrollably. The gathered socialites lowered their phones, stunned by the Blackwood Empire collapsing right before their eyes, before resuming their digital recordings. A secondary unmarked vehicle pulled up behind the barricade of police cruisers. The rear passenger door swung open and Arthur Donovan stepped out into the chaotic scene. The impeccably dressed attorney adjusted his wool overcoat. He gripped a familiar black leather briefcase in his right hand. Richard twisted his neck, his eyes locking onto the lawyer with a desperate flare of hope. "Donovan," Richard yelled, his voice pleading, "tell these officers they are making a mistake. Call the judge. Get the bail posted. Fix this immediately." Donovan did not rush to his side. The attorney walked at a deliberate pace, stopping a few feet away from the crumpled billionaire. He looked down at Richard with an expression of profound disappointment. "I am not here as your legal counsel," Richard Donovan stated, his voice carrying clearly over the wailing sirens. "I am here executing my final duties as the executor of Theodore Blackwood's estate. You are no longer my client, and I possess zero authority to halt a federal indictment." Richard struggled against the officers gripping his arms. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded. "I am the head of this family. You work for me. You have to fix the offshore accounts. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Donovan replied. opening his briefcase and pulling out a legally binding document bearing Grandpa Theodore's unmistakable seal. You sealed your own fate 3 days ago in your office, when you decided to set fire to a check worth $499 million. Did you honestly believe your father would simply hand you $500 million without a contingency plan? Richard froze, the color draining entirely from his pale face. The check, Donovan continued, his tone methodical and merciless, was not just a monetary transfer. It was legally bound to a federal immunity waiver, intricately drafted by your father's legal team. Theodore knew exactly how deeply you had corrupted his company. He knew about the Cayman Island shell corporations, the laundered funds, and the fraudulent charitable transfers you forced Savannah to execute. Donovan took a step closer. The terms of the trust were explicitly clear. By depositing that specific physical check, you would have triggered a corporate amnesty clause. The estate would have quietly absorbed the financial penalties, paying the federal government the back taxes and fines, shielding you from criminal prosecution. It was your safety net. It was your father giving you one last chance to walk away a free man. I stood silently, the sheer brilliance of Grandpa Theodore's final chess move washing over me. He knew his son better than anyone. He knew Richard's suffocating pride and explosive arrogance would never allow him to accept a handout that required him to admit defeat. By deliberately burning that document, Donovan proclaimed, his voice echoing with absolute finality, "You formally rejected the immunity waiver." The secondary clause of the trust instantly activated the moment the document was destroyed. You legally assumed full personal liability for every single illegal offshore account and every fraudulent wire transfer. You willingly stripped away your own corporate protection. Theodore did not just leave Audrey the fortune. He left her the weapon to imprison her abuser, and you pulled the trigger. Richard let out an agonizing gasp, his legs giving out completely. The officers had to haul his dead weight upward to prevent him from sliding off the hood. He had burned his own salvation. He had literally set fire to his only get-out-of-jail-free card just to stroke his own fragile ego. The federal agents patted him down, reciting his Miranda rights in a rhythm that sounded like a dirge for the Blackwood legacy. While the officers prepared to shove Richard into the squad car, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Savannah had been backing away slowly, her face entirely devoid of color. The realization that her father was going to federal prison and would undoubtedly drag her down with him had finally shattered her delusions. She spun around and sprinted across the icy parking lot, ignoring her mother's pathetic weeping. Savannah reached her pristine white Mercedes G-Wagon SUV, her hands shaking violently as she yanked the driver's side door open. She threw herself into the leather seat, slamming the door shut and locking it instantly. She mashed the ignition button, the powerful engine roaring to life, her eyes darting wildly toward the exit. She threw the massive vehicle into drive, slamming her foot down on the accelerator to flee the catastrophic humiliation and the legal storm. Before the heavy tires could spin forward, a yellow tow truck reversed out of a service lane, blocking her exit path entirely. The heavy steel ramp dropped down with a metallic clang inches from her bumper. Savannah slammed on her brakes, screaming in frustration as she laid her hand on the horn. A burly driver stepped out, walking calmly toward her window with a metal clipboard. "Move your truck right now!" Savannah shrieked through the glass. The driver tapped on her window, waiting for her to roll it down. She lowered it, furious. "I said move." The driver sighed calmly, holding up the metal clipboard. "I cannot do that, ma'am. This vehicle is being immediately repossessed. Jamal officially froze all your marital assets this morning." The heavy steel door of the police cruiser slammed shut with a deafening thud that echoed across the freezing asphalt. Behind the reinforced glass, Richard's distorted face pressed against the window, his mouth moving in silent, frantic screams as the flashing lights illuminated his complete destruction. The federal agents did not spare him a single glance. They climbed into the front seats, the powerful engine roaring as they shifted the vehicle into gear. The cruiser pulled away, tires crunching over the icy pavement, carrying the broken patriarch into the dark reality of the federal justice system. A few yards away, Savannah abandoned her futile screaming match with the tow truck driver. Her white G-Wagon was hooked to the winch, its front wheels lifting off the ground. Stripped of her primary mode of transportation and her husband's frozen bank accounts, she kicked off her designer heels. Clutching her useless Birkin bag against the biting wind, she sprinted down the long, shadowed driveway toward the main road, leaving her family without a single backward glance. Her self-preservation instinct overrode whatever fragile loyalty she possessed. The sudden departure of her husband and her golden child left Patricia exposed. The matriarch of the Blackwood family was now just a shivering, terrified woman, standing in a ruined silk gown in the middle of a parking lot. The absolute isolation crashed down upon her. She spun around, her wild eyes landing on me. I stood perfectly still near the entrance, wrapped in my tailored cashmere coat, observing the wreckage with complete emotional detachment. Patricia let out a desperate sob and stumbled across the icy cobblestones. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself lunging forward with a frantic burst of energy. She crashed into my personal space, her hands shooting out to fiercely grab the lapels of my coat. Her fingers heavy with diamond rings that would soon be seized by federal auditors dug into the thick fabric like the claws of a drowning woman. "Audrey, please," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking under the strain of absolute hysteria. "You have to stop this. We are your family. You cannot just stand there and watch your father be taken away like a common criminal. Blood is thicker than water, Audrey. You owe us your loyalty." I did not pull away. I simply lowered my gaze, staring blankly at her trembling manicured hands gripping my coat. Her knuckles were white from the freezing temperature and her desperate grip. Looking at those hands, a razor-sharp memory sliced through the chaos of the present moment. I was 18 years old. It was a Tuesday in late November, much like tonight, but an unrelenting freezing rain was pouring from the blackened sky. Richard had just discovered I secretly submitted an application to a state university program he deemed beneath our social standing. His rage had been instantaneous and physical. He grabbed me by the back of my neck, dragged me down the grand staircase, and hurled me out the front door into the torrential downpour without a coat or a single dollar to my name. I had stood on that immaculate driveway for hours, drenched to the bone, my teeth chattering so violently I thought my jaw would snap. The cold had seeped into my marrow, paralyzing my limbs. Through the blinding rain, I had looked up at the second-floor bedroom window. The golden light of the chandelier spilled out into the darkness. Patricia was standing right there. I saw her silhouette clearly against the glass. I raised my freezing hands, begging silently for my mother to come downstairs to unlock the heavy door to show me a fraction of the maternal mercy she now demanded from me. We made direct eye contact through the sheet of rain. She held my gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she simply pulled the heavy velvet blinds shut, plunging me back into the freezing dark. The memory faded, replaced by the pathetic reality of the woman sobbing against my chest. "You did not care about blood when I was 18, Patricia." I stated, my voice echoing with a glacial calm that instantly silenced her hysterical weeping. She froze, her tear-streaked eyes snapping up to meet mine. I watched the sudden flash of recognition cross her face as she remembered that rainy night. "You stood in the warmth of your bedroom and watched me freeze on the pavement. You chose your luxury and your husband's approval over your own child. You closed the blinds on me." I raised my hands, matching the exact motion she had used all those years ago. I placed my palms over hers. Methodically, with a slow, deliberate strength she could not resist, I peeled her jeweled fingers off the lapels of my coat. I pried her grip open, pushing her hands away until she stumbled backward, her arms dropping to her sides. "Blood is just biology, Patricia," I said, maintaining unwavering eye contact as her world completely collapsed. "Loyalty is a choice." I turned my back on her entirely right then. The heavy tires of my waiting Rolls-Royce Phantom crunched softly against the icy cobblestones as my driver pulled the massive, sleek vehicle directly up to the curb. The chauffeur stepped out immediately, snapping open a large black umbrella to shield me from the biting wind, and pulled the heavy rear door open. I stepped inside the pristine, immaculate cabin, the warmth instantly wrapping around me like a protective shield. I settled into the seat and gestured briefly to the driver. He shut the heavy door with a solid, definitive thud, instantly silencing the howling wind outside. As the luxury vehicle glided smoothly forward, leaving the country club behind, I glanced through the tinted privacy glass one final time. Patricia remained standing, completely alone in the center of the vast, freezing parking lot, her arms wrapped around her shivering shoulders as the snow began to fall, finally experiencing the exact same cold she had so willingly condemned me to endure. 4 months later, the sterile mahogany-lined walls of the federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan felt like a cold, inescapable, and completely silent tomb. I sat quietly in the very last row of the gallery, completely unnoticed by the media circus buzzing near the front. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone, a sharp contrast to the chaotic winter night, when I had watched my father arrested in the country club parking lot. Now it was spring, and the season of rebirth had brought the final collapse of Richard Blackwood. He sat at the defense table, a hollow shell of the terrifying patriarch who had once ruled our family through fear and financial manipulation. His bespoke suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and his signature silver hair was thinning and unkempt. The federal wire fraud and corporate larceny charges had stripped away his invincible aura, leaving behind nothing but a desperate, cornered man fighting for survival. The trial had been a brutal, meticulously documented execution. The prosecution had spent the morning walking the jury through the labyrinth of Cayman Island shell corporations and the laundered funds Theodore's trust had exposed. Faced with decades in federal prison, Richard had authorized his high-priced defense attorney Marcus Sterling to deploy a scorched earth strategy. Sterling stood before the jury box, gripping the wooden rail, weaving a narrative so deeply treacherous it made me sick to my stomach. He did not deny the fraud. The paper trail was far too concrete for outright denial. Instead, Sterling shifted the entire weight of the criminal enterprise onto the shoulders of the one person Richard had spent his entire life protecting. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the empty witness chair and painted a picture of a deceitful, greedy daughter who had taken advantage of an aging, trusting father. "Richard Blackwood is guilty of nothing more than loving his children blindly," Sterling projected, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. He handed over the keys to the kingdom to his eldest daughter, Savannah, trusting her to manage the estate's charitable transfers. He did not know she was funneling those millions into offshore accounts. He did not know she was using his signature stamps to authorize illegal wire transfers. Savannah Blackwood was the sole architect of this massive financial deception, manipulating a father's unconditional trust to line her own pockets. I watched Richard carefully. He kept his head bowed, playing the part of the betrayed, broken parent with nauseating accuracy. He was willing to sacrifice his golden child, the daughter he had groomed and favored, to shave a few years off his impending sentence. He was attempting to secure a plea deal by feeding his own flesh and blood to the federal wolves. Watching him sit there, feigning heartbreak, a specific memory surfaced with crystal clarity. I was 16, standing in Richard's pristine home office, holding a bank statement I had accidentally opened. It showed a massive transfer from my college savings account to cover Savannah's reckless credit card debt. When I questioned him, Richard had grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises for a week. He shoved me out the door, hissing that Savannah was the heir to the empire, and I was just the spare, a disposable asset meant to support her. Now the man who had demanded my absolute subservience to his favored child was frantically trying to destroy her to save his own skin. The irony was almost suffocating. He had taught Savannah everything she knew about loyalty, demonstrating day after day that self-preservation was the only rule that mattered. He was about to learn exactly just how flawlessly she had absorbed every single part of that brutal lesson. Sterling concluded his opening argument with a theatrical sigh, shaking his head in mock sorrow before returning to the defense table. Richard patted his lawyer on the arm, a subtle gesture of congratulation. They genuinely believed their narrative had planted the seed of reasonable doubt. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, turned her gaze to the prosecution table. The lead federal prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Harris, stood up slowly. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Richard. The defense has spun a compelling tale of a father betrayed. Harris stated, his voice calm and lethal. They claim Savannah Blackwood acted alone, orchestrating this massive fraud while keeping her father completely in the dark. We intend to prove otherwise. We do not rely on wild speculation, empty theories, or purely circumstantial evidence to prove this man's undeniable guilt. We rely on the testimony of the one person who was in the room when every illegal decision was made. Harris turned toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. The prosecution calls its star witness Savannah Blackwood to the stand. The heavy wooden doors swung open with a resounding thud. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Richard's head snapped up, his jaw dropping in absolute horror. He gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. Savannah stepped into the courtroom flanked by two federal marshals. She wore a simple, unadorned gray suit, completely stripped of her usual designer armor. Her eyes were locked onto her father, burning with a cold, intense, and terrifying rage. She did not look like a frightened daughter facing criminal charges. She looked like an executioner. The prosecutor continued, his voice ringing over the shocked murmurs of the crowd. Ms. Blackwood has accepted a full federal immunity deal. In exchange for avoiding prison, she has agreed to provide complete, unredacted testimony detailing exactly how Richard Blackwood ordered, supervised, and executed every single fraudulent transaction. Savannah walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor, completely ignoring the frantic, terrified whispers of her father's defense team. She stepped up to the witness stand, raising her right hand to take the oath, guaranteeing her father would receive the absolute maximum sentence. 4 months later, the dust had completely settled on the ruins of the Blackwood Empire. Richard was sitting in a federal penitentiary serving the first weeks of a 20-year sentence. His high-profile trial had ended the moment his golden child took the stand against him. The federal government had seized his offshore accounts, liquidated his assets, and auctioned off the sprawling estate. The socialite circles that once clamored for an invitation to Patricia's dinner parties now treated the Blackwood name like a highly contagious disease. I, on the other hand, had never been better. With the offshore liabilities successfully pinned to Richard and the corporate rot surgically removed, I restructured the legitimate remnants of Theodore's company under my own banner. The suffocating shadow of my family had finally evaporated. It was a crisp Thursday afternoon when I arrived at the Oakmont Country Club. Oakmont was an institution of old money. For decades, it had been my parents' favorite playground, a place where they flaunted their wealth. Now I was the one holding the platinum membership, closing a highly lucrative merger over a bottle of vintage champagne. As my international investors departed to their waiting town cars, I decided to stop by the powder room to freshen up before heading back to my corporate office. The Oakmont Women's Lounge was a masterpiece of excessive luxury. Soft golden light filtered through crystal sconces illuminating pristine white marble countertops. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into the quiet sanctuary. The room was empty save for the bathroom attendant, a woman standing with her back to me, diligently folding thick linen hand towels. She wore the standard club uniform, a stiff black dress, a starched white apron, and sensible orthopedic shoes, effectively rendering her invisible to the wealthy patrons. I placed my leather handbag on the polished marble vanity. The sharp click of my heels caused the attendant to jump slightly. She turned around to offer me a fresh towel, her practiced customer service smile already forming on her lips. The smile vanished the second our eyes locked. The linen towel slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the marble counter with a soft thud. It was Patricia. The woman dressed in a coarse black uniform and scrubbing sinks for minimum wage was my mother. The transformation was brutally absolute. The expensive blonde highlights were gone, replaced by dull, thinning hair, pulled into a severe bun. The designer cosmetics had been scrubbed away, revealing deep, exhausted lines etched into her pale skin. Without the shield of Richard's stolen wealth, She looked incredibly frail and profoundly ordinary. The federal asset freeze had stripped her of everything. The jewelry had been confiscated, the luxury cars repossessed. She had been left with nothing but mountainous legal debts and the crushing reality of manual labor. Patricia's eyes widened in absolute horror. A suffocating wave of deep shame washed over her features. She immediately dropped her gaze to the floor, her shoulders hunching forward, as if trying to physically shrink herself out of existence. Her hands, devoid of the massive diamond rings she used to flaunt, gripped the edge of the marble vanity so tightly her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth, perhaps to beg or apologize, but no sound came out. The overwhelming humiliation clamped her throat shut. She looked away, her face burning a deep, blotchy red, unable to bear the weight of my stare. I did not flinch. I did not smile. I did not offer a single ounce of pity. I turned on the gold faucet and washed my hands in complete, deafening silence. The rushing water was the only sound in the opulent room. I took my time lathering the jasmine-scented soap, rinsing it away, thoroughly enjoying the supreme shift in power. When I finished, I reached past her trembling form and pulled a fresh linen towel from the stack. I dried my hands methodically, maintaining a glacial composure. Patricia stood frozen, her chest heaving with silent, suppressed sobs. She was waiting for the final blow. But true power does not require words. I unclasped my handbag and reached inside my wallet. I pulled out a crisp, newly minted $100 bill. I placed it gently into the small woven tip basket sitting on the counter, making sure it rested perfectly in the center. I met her tear-filled, devastated eyes one last time. I let the silence hang in the air, allowing her to fully absorb her new reality. I picked up my bag, turned on my heel, and walked out of the restroom without uttering a single syllable. Leaving that tip was the most devastating goodbye I could have ever delivered. The crisp afternoon air felt remarkably refreshing as I exited the grand lobby. The valet immediately brought my sleek black Rolls-Royce to the portico. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, savoring the absolute silence of the soundproof cabin. The engine hummed to life, a quiet purr of ultimate control. As my driver navigated down the pristine driveway steering us toward the highway, my phone buzzed inside my purse. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was an unknown burner number. I pressed accept and brought the device to my ear. "Audrey, please do not hang up," a desperate voice pleaded. It was Savannah. Background noise flooded the speaker, a chaotic cacophony of ringing phones, shouting supervisors, and the dreary hum of a massive low-rent call center. Stripped of her trust fund and blacklisted from every reputable corporate sector in the country, the former heiress was now shackled to a cheap headset, fielding customer complaints for minimum wage. "Audrey, please," Savannah sobbed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "I am begging you. My landlord is evicting me tomorrow. I just need $500 to make rent. Please, I have nothing left." I silently lowered the phone, tapped the red button, and permanently blocked the number. I leaned back, watching the glittering city skyline approach. Savannah's testimony on the witness stand was a surgical strike against the man who raised her. Wearing a plain gray suit, she methodically detailed every offshore account, forged signature, and shell company Richard had created to launder his stolen funds. The jury listened in stunned silence as the former golden child handed the prosecution the keys needed to lock her father away forever. They took less than 3 hours to return a guilty verdict on all 74 counts of federal wire fraud and corporate larceny. The judge handed down a 30-year sentence without the possibility of parole. Richard Blackwood would die inside a federal penitentiary. Savannah's immunity deal kept her out of a prison cell, but the federal government seized every stolen asset, leaving her completely bankrupt and socially radioactive. The empire was officially dead. A few months after the trial concluded, I found myself walking through the opulent halls of the Oakmont Country Club. This was the same elite establishment my parents had used as their personal stage for decades. Now I was the one holding the platinum membership, having just closed a highly profitable merger with international investors over lunch. I navigated the thick carpeted corridor, and pushed open the heavy oak door to the women's lounge. The room was a masterclass in quiet luxury featuring gold-plated fixtures and immaculate marble countertops. A woman in a starched black uniform and sensible orthopedic shoes stood by the sinks, her back turned as she meticulously arranged thick linen hand towels. Hearing the door shut, the attendant jumped slightly and spun around, a rehearsed, subservient smile automatically forming on her lips. The smile instantly evaporated. The linen towel slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the marble with a soft thud. It was Patricia. The former matriarch of the Blackwood family was now scrubbing porcelain sinks and handing out breath mints for minimum wage. The federal asset freeze and Richard's astronomical legal fees had swallowed her entire existence, leaving her with a mountain of debt. Stripped of her expensive blonde highlights, designer cosmetics, and arrogant pride, she looked incredibly frail and profoundly ordinary. The moment she recognized me, the blood completely drained from her face. A wave of suffocating shame washed over her features. Her shoulders hunched forward as she immediately dropped her gaze to the floor, utterly terrified to meet my eyes. She gripped the edge of the marble vanity so tightly, her knuckles turned white silently, praying the floor would swallow her whole. I did not say a single word. I walked to the sink directly beside her, turned on the gold faucet, and washed my hands. The rushing water was the only sound in the dead silence of the room. I took my time lathering the soap, enjoying the supreme shift in power. When I finished, I reached past her trembling form and pulled a fresh towel from the stack. I dried my hands methodically. Opening my leather purse, I withdrew a crisp $100 bill and placed it deliberately into her small woven tip basket. I turned and walked out, leaving my mother trapped in her own humiliation. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the valet instantly bringing my vehicle to the portico. I slid into the driver's seat, savoring the quiet peace of the cabin. Before I could shift into gear, my cell phone vibrated. The screen displayed an unknown burner number. I tapped accept. "Audrey, please do not hang up," a desperate, raspy voice pleaded. It was Savannah. In the background, I could hear the chaotic, depressing hum of a minimum wage call center. Ringing phones and shouting supervisors bled through the speaker. "I am begging you," Savannah sobbed, her voice cracking. "My landlord is evicting me tomorrow morning. I have absolutely nothing left. I just need a $500 loan to make rent. Please, Audrey." I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the red button, and blocked the number permanently. 30 minutes later, I pulled up to a massive construction site in the heart of the city. Towering cranes moved steel beams through the air as workers laid the foundation for a state-of-the-art medical facility. Jamal was waiting for me near the foreman's trailer, wearing a hard hat and reviewing architectural blueprints. He looked up and smiled warmly as I approached. The past few months had treated him remarkably well. He had officially finalized his divorce from Savannah, executing an ironclad separation agreement that granted him full custody of his finances. He was finally free from the Blackwood toxicity, pouring his energy into his true passion. I pulled a pristine manila folder from my briefcase. "These are the final authorized transfers," I said, handing him a sleek silver pen. "The funding is officially cleared." Jamal took the pen and signed the bottom line with a steady hand. He had just secured the complete, unrestricted capital required to build a cutting-edge pediatric orthopedic wing. The new facility would be named in honor of Grandpa Theodore, cementing the only legacy that actually mattered. We shared a long look of profound mutual respect. We were two people who had survived the exact same toxic family and emerged stronger, smarter, and infinitely more powerful. That evening, I stood alone on the expansive glass balcony of my Sentinel skyscraper penthouse. The city stretched out beneath me, an endless grid of glowing lights and pulsing energy. The cold wind whipped past my face, but I felt absolute, undeniable clarity. I watched the traffic moving far below, reflecting on the empire I now controlled. True revenge was never about shouting, screaming, or actively destroying the people who hurt you. It was about severing their access to your light. It was about stepping back, pulling your resources, and letting them completely destroy themselves with their own unchecked greed and suffocating pride. While they burned their own world to ash, I had quietly built an unshakable empire. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air, savoring the absolute silence of my sanctuary. I was finally free. Fade to black.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.